This is WPSL Port St. Lucie, the talk of the Treasure Coast.
It's 11:08 at WPSL 1590, the talk of the Treasure Coast, and you're on Ask a Rabbi.
Hello there, how are you? And this is the beginning of Ramadan, so to our Muslim brethren, Ramadan Mubarak. This is Rabbi Shafir Lobb for Ask a Rabbi, and hopefully we'll actually have a Muslim on with me either next week or the following week.
That would be cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Planning on that, so yeah.
Oh, and happy Easter, I guess, if you're Eastern Orthodox.
You know, there's lots.
That's the calendars that you keep talking about.
You know,
different calendars.
there's still hundreds of calendars out there that intersect and interweave, and you know, and amazingly, despite the arrogance and for lack of a better word, of adherents of various religions, the religions themselves all teach that other religions are valid and true.
Well, certainly. Why not?
You know, God is bigger, right? God is bigger than Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, Shinto, you know, whatever. It doesn't really matter where you're coming from. Right. The point of the religion is that it's for you to connect you to God, or to however you practice whatever your cosmology is, because that's really at the root of all religions.
Unless you're sort of manipulated.
Well, you know, unfortunately, and I say this in all contexts all the time, beware of politicians wearing religious robes.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Right?
Okay.
Because religion, unfortunately, because it wields the power of God, it wields the power of life and death for some people, is an amazing tool to use to manipulate people. And so manipulators, right, who are toxic people, use it. And it taints religion, unfortunately.
And that's probably been done for thousands of years.
At least.
At least.
You know, it's been around since dirt.
I wonder if the Chinese ever really had that person.
Sure they did. Every group has had it. And when you get somebody who's addicted to power, right, and that's what manipulating others is. It's an addiction to power. If you believe that you have the power and or you want to wield that, then, you know, yeah, it's an addiction. It's an addiction. It's an addiction to that. You know, and having been a low-level manager in a company or a higher level in a small thing, I can tell you that power can be very addictive and very tantalizing. And hello, Bob. Thank you for calling in.
Good morning, Rabbi. Maybe nowadays they teach that all religions are true and all religions are that they worship the same God and blah, blah, blah. But I can remember as a kid, I was raised Catholic. I went to Catholic school, and I remember having this one nun in religion class that told us that the Catholic Church was the one true church founded by Jesus Christ. She didn't say this, but the implication was that if you weren't Catholic, you might as well be a non-person.
Okay, so thank you for that, Bob, and let me repeat it for those who there's some folks who don't hear the questions. And Bob's question is, he was raised as a Catholic, and one nun out of all of the gazillion penguins, but all of the gazillion nuns running around, said that Catholicism was the one true religion and the only path to God. And
Well, I've heard that line before.
and there are manipulators within every religion. Now, here's the side that I'm going to tell you about that, Bob. This is the psychologist in me. That means they're terrified that they're wrong. Okay?
That's a great
That
line.
means
Okay.
that they're terrified that they haven't found the one true answer. And the reality is they haven't, because there's not one true answer. There are many true answers.
Yeah, but when they're dealing with a bunch of young kids,
And they want to manipulate those young kids, right? They
It's
want to
like,
plant
oh,
that
yeah.
seed that there is only one right answer for anything. And it's probably the biggest thing that I teach at IRSC. And, our semester ends Monday, so yeah, I'm really, wrapping a whole bunch of stuff up. And one of the things that I ask my students is, what are some of the takeaways? Give me the 3 pearls that you got out of this semester. And I just use that for feedback to see, what's happening in the class at the end. Because in the beginning, none of them believe me. But, after I've hammered on them for 12 or 13 weeks, some of it gets through. And probably the overarching comment I get is that I now realize there's more than one way to look at any issue. That, there's right answers on both sides of every issue.
but see, that's common sense.
Yeah, but we don't teach common sense in most
That's true.
in most scenarios,
Neither
right?
did-
Right, Bob?
Neither did Sister Rosalma.
Right. And so Sister was, one of those folks. It's who, we classify her as my way or the highway, right?
Was she seven?
Pretty much, yeah.
Wait, Bob, was she 7'3" like the nuns that I had?
Yeah, probably. Well, she taught a bunch of blind kids, so we didn't know how tall or how short she was.
gosh!
But she did have the white knuckle ruler.
Yeah, So okay. So here's the issue that you have inside religion and religious people, which is that religions, unfortunately, are, when they're organized, they are composed of human beings. Right? They are composed of human beings who, one way or another, will say that does look nasty out there, doesn't it? There's a flash of weather that just went through the
We're
studio.
looking at this
Yeah,
monstrous weather system.
there's a weather system going across the radar
brother.
screen in the studio. So, folks. But anyway, back to the reality of the radio show that we're on. Human beings are perfectly human, which means we're perfectly flawed, right? And so we bring our hubris, our humor, that's the Hebrew word for it, our stuff, into the argument. And then we wrap it in religious robes because we don't like how it looks naked. So you like that imagery?
Whoa!
Yeah.
Okay.
But here's the piece that I'll share with you. And this was a lesson taught to the rabbinical students. No, I take that back. He did it at the rabbis' conference. So we're talking hundreds of rabbis sitting around listening to this. It's Rabbi Daniel Siegel, who lives up in Hornby Island, up Vancouver way, British Columbia. And he was in for the conference. And he was explaining a couple of things. And he was doing a teaching of some sort. I don't remember all the details. But this piece really hit me. And I'll share it because it was so powerful. He said, we talk to God all the time. We call that prayer, right? And sometimes we yell at God. Sometimes we scream at God. Sometimes we cry to God. We do all kinds of things to reach out to God. No argument. Everybody does that. As they say, there are no atheists in foxholes. And, however you do that, whether it's just a reaching out to the universe or actually uttering a scripted prayer, all of those and everything in between it works as a reach out from the human to God. And then Rabbi Siegel continued, every once in a while, God responds. And most of the time that we think we've heard God, we really need to be careful because it might be that little G God inside us called ego that's lying to us, because our egos lie to us more than anything else does. And so he said, so you got to check it. You got to check it. You got to see, is this really from the source of life, the creator of all, who breathes life into the system, or is this you wanting to be something bigger than you are? He says, here's how you check it. Okay, he says, you look around, and if you think that some people are inferior to you, and you think you're better or entitled for any reason, then that's the little g God in you. But if you look out and you see the beauty and the awesomeness and the amazingness of the God spark in all of us, then there's a much better chance that that's the big G God. And if and only if you see that, are you likely to be talking to God or hearing from God.
That's nice.
You like that?
Oh, yeah.
B'Shem
Yeah.
Rabbi Daniel Siegel. Thank you, Reb Daniel. So Bob, I would offer that, right? I just had a guy.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Yeah, you're welcome, Bob. Thank you for calling. I'll go ahead and I'll share that I just had an interchange on the congregation Facebook, and it's kind of funny. And yeah, you're on here, Al, so you might as well hear about this because he cautioned me. A Moroccan somehow tripped across my Torah moment that's every day on Facebook at 1 o'clock Eastern Times, folks. So you can tune into that as well. And that's just a half hour of Torah. Torah means instruction, and I pray that that's worthwhile for people. But in any event, somebody came on, and their name was on in Arabic, and they've proceeded to continue to talk, and they asked a couple of questions. What religion are you? And I must have answered 3 times that we were Jewish. It didn't seem to penetrate. But then the person said, what's the most popular religion in the world? And I said, well, right now the majority of adherents are some form of Christian, right? And Christianity involves all of those Christianities that are focused on the teachings, life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, which means that Jehovah Witness are included in there, Christian Science is included in there, Latter-day Saints are included in there, all of the different Christianities that sometimes people try to ostracize. If you don't have those folks in that definition, folks, you don't have the largest religion, so you kind of need them. It's a love-hate relationship.
Oh.
Yeah. So
we're so fortunate that we don't have any egos on this planet now.
Of course not. No, let's not even go there. We'll get to you in a second, Kurt. I see you there, but let me just finish this one thought. So then he comes back to. I didn't go into that. I just said, Christianity has the largest number of adherents in the world, and he came back and he said to me, well, Islam is the one true religion. It's the most popular. And I said, let's remember what Muhammad said. Muhammad, peace and blessings upon him, as we enter Ramadan, said that different religions and different ways of practicing are God's gift to humanity.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah, so.
And that was Muhammad who said that.
Yeah. Yeah,
Wow.
You don't hear that quoted quite
No,
that often,
you
do you?
never do.
Right, that's because of people who, again, people with ego wrapping themselves in religious robes.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay, so that's a good point to turn to Kurt on line 3 from Port St. Lucie. What can I help you with? Thank you for calling, Kurt.
Yeah, good morning. I've listened to your show and quite a few times.
Thank you.
You have an interesting perspective. I was going to pass along a couple of things. I part of my childhood, 8-9 years of my childhood, I spent in Wilmington, Delaware, and we lived in a neighborhood that was. There were 3 Gentile families in the whole neighborhood. That's pretty bad.
So you were in a Mormon neighborhood.
Yes, I probably knew more about Hanukkah than some of the Jewish kids did. I mean, I went over and would spin the dreidel and the whole 9 yards. But the one thing that's impressed me over the years, and I've got a few years on this body, but the one thing that has impressed me over the years, it's very rare amongst all of the religions that I have encountered that I don't run into too many Jewish folks that are preachy. I mean, what I'm saying by that is...
We don't try to convince you that Judaism is the only right religion.
Exactly. I very rarely get a sales pitch from somebody of the Jewish faith that that I should, in fact, I go to Morningside Church. I'm sure you're familiar with that.
I've heard of it. Yes, thank you.
And well, it's over.
Yeah.
Anyway, they share space with you guys in that building there, but Morningside West. But anyway, we had a group of women in there on a service one particular Saturday night, which is they worship loud, the music and so forth. And there was about 10 or 12 women that the pastor introduced up there and said, please tell the members what you're there. And he said, we are Jews for Jesus. And it was, it was kind of refreshing, but anyway, what I was going to pass along to you, I've been in alcohol recovery since 1987. Okay. So I've got a few years under my belt. And one of the first things I heard when we were in recovery, and goes along with what you were saying, ego. Okay.
Yep.
They used to tell us very briefly, ego means edging God out.
Ooh, I like that. Okay. Yeah.
Whoa, that's heavy duty. That's great.
If you can put God in your order, even if you don't necessarily believe, we call it in AA a higher power.
Yeah.
But even if you don't believe in the being God, just think what God stands for. And so what's that? Good, orderly direction.
Okay. Well,
so I just thought I'd pass that along to you.
Thank you, Kurt. And so Kurt brought up a couple of things. Yeah, thank you for calling. You were talking about that Jews don't tend to be preachy. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One of which is that we often got killed for doing it. And so over the millennia, we've learned not to do much of it.
That'll teach you.
Yeah. Because Christian nations and Islamic nations do not tolerate proselytizing from the minorities. But historically.
Might be intolerant?
Some leaders might not be tolerant of people who don't agree with them. Yes. That gets back to that same nun that Bob was talking about.
Yeah, yes.
But, Kurt, so you raised something else that's worth noting, which is, and when you said that Morningside and Jews share space, I'm not sure how or where that is, because Morningside's a pretty big church, and
they're on the west side with you, though. The smaller branch is with you right by the Met Stadium, or relatively close.
Okay, so they're renting other spaces in the area where we're renting space. Yep. Okay, I got you. Okay, thank you for that clarification. But let me point out one thing that you mentioned, Kurt, because that's in many ways a really big issue, which is you said they're Jews for Jesus. If they're based on the teachings, life, death, resurrection of Jesus, they're Christians. They're in that Christian definition. They are not Jewish. The whole concept of needing or wanting a Christos is not Jewish. Judaism does not have that kind of intercessor between us and God. God has never turned God's back on Jews.
So there's no one between you and God?
No. Everybody prays directly to God. Everybody can hear directly from God. That's a Jewish tenet. There is no one that you have to pray to, nobody that you need to bring you to. And I'll offer you the teaching that tries to teach that in Christian scriptures, but is often missed, and that's the prodigal son. The son who stays with God the Father is Judaism.
Wow.
That's the son who never leaves. Okay? Right. And so would not have the fatted calf, not a fatted pig, but a fatted cat, a cow, rather, right? And there's a lot of symbology in there, right? Because the prodigal son comes back from taking care of pigs and comes back to the father.
Mm-hmm.
Hello. Right? The pig is a reference to those who don't practice Judaism.
Yeah. Wow.
Okay, so you've got to unpack these codes.
Man, you really are. Wow.
Yeah. Okay. You're talking to somebody who's my specialty when I was studying to be a rabbi was first and second Judea. Okay. So the period that I know I'm going to say I've forgotten parts of it for sure, because I've not been as heavy into that period with all of my more recent studies. But, I was most familiar with early Christianity, the early followers of Jesus, up through and before Constantine. Constantine and his follow-afterers, not his followers, but the folks who came after him and really wrote that part of history. That's when Christianity becomes the state religion. And that wasn't as much done under Constantine as it was done right after him. Right? Scholars will tell you that Constantine was actually baptized on his deathbed. And why? Because his mother and sister were devout Christians.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so when he gets weak enough that he can't argue with them,
he gets baptized.
He gets baptized. And so, you have to look at, and so they're going to enact things. Right? Another Caesar comes up who does not last very long, who tries to make everything okay again, bring back the old time, and he gets killed almost immediately. And so it's the Caesar who comes after him who really cements and makes it illegal to be anything but a Roman Catholic.
Wow.
And so Christianity changes dramatically from the old-time religion in actually 4th century Rome, and becomes this melting pot of Roman Christianity. But, which has since moved to Constantinople, right? Constantine's city.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And it's not going to come back to Rome for a while until there's a schism between East and West, which is going to happen. Not surprisingly, Rome has never been that homogeneous. It really hasn't. There's too many different people, too many different tribal customs involved. And to try to cover all of that, you get a lot of rice Christians. Rice Christian is the term, by the way, for
Rice
somebody
Christian.
who doesn't really give up their old religion, but who adds Christianity as an overlay. And we see a lot of that. But this is not looking at it from a theologian's standpoint. I'm not trying to prove that my theology is right. I am simply looking at the sociology and the psychology and the overarching teachings around the religions.
Okay, so looking at the original, if you want to say the Roman Catholic Church, okay? Going back to
3rd century?
Yeah.
Okay.
How did the massive bureaucracy build?
Because they the bishop was a civil leader, not a religious leader. So they blended church and state. Okay, and which gave them the infrastructure. That starts to happen at the end of the 1st century.
Wow.
And it has more to do with the status of Rome, because Rome, as a government, starts to administer religion. They did some of that in Judea. That's part of why the temple cultists got into trouble, because Rome, when Herod, okay, let's go all the way back. Let's go back to Hanukkah. Hanukkah predates Jesus,
right,
by a few hundred years, anywhere between 2 and 4, depending on which scholar you're talking to. But it's the Hasmonean dynasty, Hashmonaim, the 8. We won't go there. Lots of reasons for 8 in Hanukkah.
Okay.
And it's not just oil. Oh. Oil is the later add-on after the Romans come in.
Oil.
Okay, so so when the Hasmoneans, when Mattathias and his band of merry sons, and I'm being a little bit irreverent here intentionally, when they overthrow, right? So the tinderbox event that's recorded in the Book of Maccabees is that a Roman official comes to the town of Moda'in, and we're not 100% sure where that is right now. It's somewhere south of Jerusalem. But they come in, and Mattathias is the priest, the Kohen, in that area. And they pull him forward in the group, and they say, make a sacrifice of a pig to Zeus so that everybody will follow you. And he basically says, no. You can put whatever adjectives in front of that you want.
To Zeus.
Well, to the Roman official. And then,
Gotcha. Okay.
you know, and the Roman is trying to use nice, semi-nice terms and saying, well, you know, if you do that, then riches are yours, and you'll earn the favor of this of Alexander and his whatevers, and you know, it'll be wonderful for you. Okay, you'll have the favor of the king. And Mattathias still says no. You know, I'm for the old time religion. You know, we're gonna take back the temple. We're waiting for you to leave. And probably not in those words, but, you know, in essence says, no, I can't do that. And somebody else from the community, some kind of a leader in the community, comes forward and says, I'd like to have the favor of the king. I'll do it. And Mattathias loses his cool and kills the guy. Kind of old-time religion.
Okay.
You know, so now he's got a problem, right? Because the Greek has watched him and said, I'm sorry, I said you. Greco-Roman becomes kind of blurred as Rome takes over Greece, which is happening in Europe at this time, starting to happen in Europe. And so Mattathias now has a problem because he's done this in front of the Greek, the Hellenistic official. And so he solves his problem in the way of all revolutionaries. He kills the guard. Okay, he kills the official. So now he's got two problems. And so he and his sons take to the hills with all those who are for God follow me kind of a cry. And it becomes a revolution, a rebellion, an overthrow. And, you know, we like to say, you know, God did that because of God's Spirit, and that's a wonderful teaching. Except that what the reality of history tells you is that the reason that they were successful was because Greece was a little too busy with Rome trying to save themselves, and they weren't successful in that. And so Rome is coming up, Greece is on the way down. That's what's happening in the bigger wide world. And with that, the Hasmoneans are able to take over Jerusalem. They liberate Jerusalem from the Hellenistic kind of, sort of. They don't totally get rid of it. Because one of the things we see from then on is that people have two names. They have a Jewish name and a secular name. Okay,
wow,
so there's kind of an interesting piece there. But the Jewish scripture is closed before this happens. The only reason that we have the book of Maccabees is because the Catholic Church has maintained it in the Apocrypha. Jews don't have those books, so we kind of learned a lot more about the origins of Hanukkah from those texts, because what was carried down through the Roman period is not as definitive. So let's take a look at what happens. They cleanse the temple, and according to the book of Maccabees, they're actually celebrating Sukkot, the festival, the fall dedication festival. Hanukkah means dedication, and that's an 8-day festival, Sukkot and Shmini Atzeret. And the book of Maccabees explains that wasn't done at its normal time because the temple wasn't yet ready. And so they celebrate it over the time of the other festivals of light, which, you know, is a Zoroastrian reference. All right, it's a Persian reference. It's a other things reference. And so the festival.
Go, Zoroastrians.
Yeah, there I go again.
Yep.
Right. So there's that overlay, and so Hanukkah is celebrated as 8 days of light, celebrating the rededication of the temple. And then later on, the rabbis are actually trying, and we'll get to there. They're trying to squash it, and so there's this discussion about candles and oil and stuff like that. Oh, the calls are starting to come in. Okay, so when Mattathias is successful in overthrowing the Greeks, he doesn't, but his son becomes king of Judea. Right. So now we've got this problem that has always been a problem, and I don't care who does it. You don't combine church and state, but the Hasmoneans do, and one of the things that they do is the things that these kind of folks always do when they come to power. They forcibly convert everybody in the countryside. One of the countrysides that they go to is the area of Idumea, to the south of Judea. And they forcibly convert all of the people there. Josephus, the historian, says of the Idumeans, they did not change their practice. They only called themselves Jews. Okay? So, yeah. And
Wow.
where is Herod from? Idumea. Okay, so let's fast forward to the time of Herod. How does Herod come to power? Herod comes to power because he becomes the husband of the only heir of the Hasmoneans, which is Mariamne. It's a woman. What does a woman need? She needs somebody to give her heirs, right? And somehow Herod becomes her husband, and he basically takes over the throne. History's a little bit fuzzy here. She gets under house arrest.
I was going to say,
Yeah.
what do you do to her?
Well, he does. He confines her. He puts her under house arrest. It's not clear whether the 4 sons are born after she's under house arrest or they're born first and then he locks her away. And maybe they've got more definitive history since the last time I looked at it, because it's been a couple of years. And but she's under house arrest, if you will. He does not want her to have anything more to do it. And here's where history really gets wonderfully muddy. Herod names all 4 of his sons Herod. Right? So you have Herod Agrippa, Herod Antipas, using kind of the Asian custom of your family name being the first name.
Or
right.
like George Foreman.
Yeah, or George Foreman. There you go. Right. So, yeah.
Wow.
Okay, so that all gets to that. And John, I have not forgotten you. We'll get to you in 1 second here. Let me just finish this. So, yeah, so that's how Herod comes to be. And because he's Idumean, he does not have the respect of the Judeans.
Wow.
And, and so when he tries to, and he's Herod the Great because he builds. If you're going to build something, what do you need? You need money. You need people to do the work. So he's got forced labor. He's got conscripted labor. He's got high taxes. They're paying taxes to the temple anyway. Gee, surprise, surprise. They don't want to do it. Rome is coming up and asking for, they're basically saying to everybody, you pay a tribute and we'll leave you alone. And he can't collect more money because he's already collected more than the people can bear. Anyway, so when he tries to collect the tribute for Rome, the people rebel. And Herod says, oh, look at these people don't want to, they don't want peace with you. And so Rome sends contingents into Judea to, quote unquote, keep the peace. Now we've got a secondary problem because it continues to get worse, because now Herod not only has to pay the tribute, but now he has to pay for the cost of bringing the troops into Judea to keep the peace. Can we see how this is going to snowball and get worse and worse?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
And so that's the setting into which Jesus is born.
Wow.
So we'll take John's question and then I'll go back.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so John from Port St. Lucie, thank you for calling. What's your question?
Oh, thank you. Thank you for taking my call. I enjoyed the history part. I didn't know it was a call-in show till the day I heard someone else call in.
Yeah.
I've been doing a lot of studying recently. I enjoy one of my instructors, Amy Jill Levine. You've probably heard of her.
Yes.
But I'm thinking about the Septuagint and the problems it caused. When it was written, I guess, who was using it. I know all the gospel writers, when they were quoting the scriptures, they seemed to be quoting the Septuagint instead of the original Hebrew, at least in the diaspora, these communities. And obviously, it caused problems like Isaiah 7:14, where there was a young pregnant woman, and by the time the young child was going to know good from evil, things were going to be okay. But we know how Matthew and Luke ran off with that with nativity stories, trying to find some material, to pad their stories with. And I'll take the call off air. I'm just wondering about the history of the Septuagint. Were they still using the original scriptures, say in Jerusalem, but the Septuagint everywhere else, and what other problems that has caused? I just wanted your opinion on that, because I like the history aspect. And I'll take the call off air.
Okay, well, thank you, John. Thank you for calling. John is asking about the Septuagint, the Greek translation of scriptures, of Jewish scriptures, and which has the legend that 70 people did it in 70 days, and they all came up with exactly the same translation. A wonderful story. You can't translate scripture that quickly. So there are a number of different translations.
Wow, that's
okay.
That's
I will get to that in a second.
That is
yeah,
phenomenal.
boy, we've got a bunch of stuff today. So thank you for calling in. This is probably the most calls I've had. This is Ask a Rabbi, 772-340-1590 for anybody who needs the number, please do call with your questions.
And if you've got a business and you'd like to sponsor the show,
Yes,
feel free to call a
absolutely.
rabbi.
We need sponsors. I don't pitch that enough. I guess that's part of Jews not asking enough.
That's right.
We definitely could use some sponsors for the show, so if you'd do us that honor, we'd greatly appreciate it, and then I can answer some more of these questions. Okay, so John's question was, what was the role of the Septuagint? And it's not the only translation that's running around. There's also something called Onkelos. Onkelos is in Aramaic, and it's a very interesting translation because it also helps us see a little bit of how first century Jews viewed the Hebrew of Scriptures. There are words that we've lost. Okay? There are words that we've lost. There's something called hapax lagama, which is a word that's used one time in Scriptures. And so, one of the ways that you figure out what a word means is by looking at how it's used in different contexts. And then you get an idea of what a word really means.
But it's only used once?
There are a number of words. There are in Scriptures, yeah. You could probably Google it and find out how many there are, because there are people who do that sort of thing. And there's lots of words that get mistranslated because of things like that. So dealing with what are the folks speaking, right? Because Hebrew is considered always a very holy, private language and that's one of the big arguments that some of the Orthodox have with Ben Yehuda, who really wanted modern Israel to speak Hebrew, and he won. They can't stand that because they consider Hebrew to be the holy language. Aramaic becomes the language that's used more commonly. We see it still used among some Coptic Christians. So there are pockets of it still around, and Talmud is written in Aramaic. It's kind of a Hebrew. Mishnah is a little bit more Hebrew Aramaic, and by the time you get to Talmud, it's much more Aramaic. Yeah, languages change. So, the Septuagint is a Greek translation to make it much more accessible to people who don't speak Hebrew, just as most Jews today do not speak Hebrew. Israelis speak Hebrew. They speak a different Hebrew. They speak modern Hebrew, and it's been fascinating to me in my long lifetime, which is not that long, to watch the changes in Hebrew in Israel. It's dramatically changing, and it sounds weird to my ears from when I lived there a while ago.
Is it kind of like border Spanish?
Yeah, right. It's like
joking.
Spanglish. It's like Spanglish.
It's like Spanglish. Wow.
Right,
okay.
because when people bring a language, when they bring a culture into another culture, it's not given up completely, and words creep both ways. And so there is this jargon, right? So the Spanish in Cuba is different from the Spanish in Spain, which is different from the Spanish in Peru, which is different from the Spanish in Mexico. And to a Spaniard, they can tell the different dialects, and just as we kind of can with English. Look at how different English is between England and America, or between Canada and America, even, right? And sometimes you could argue that Tennessee and
between Alabama
Georgia,
and America.
Yeah. Never mind. I'm diverging far too much. So anyway, so language does change, and it definitely influences it. And you're right, John, that people were trying to. San Diego Spanish is different, and that's because they're connected to Tijuana, and Tucson's connected to, to the Sonoran Desert.
Nogales.
Yeah, to Nogales in that area. Well, Nogales is theoretically. Anyway.
Never mind.
So it has to do with what's the local area and what are the local traditions, and that plays in a lot. There's even an argument, if you pay attention to it, in Jewish scriptures between Israel, the kingdom of Israel, and the kingdom of Judea. They're separate kingdoms. They are not united after David. And even David, they were not really united. He was the king he was the king of Israel and the king of Judea, and the king of Moab and the king of many other places. He was a little emperor, not so little, in the world that he lived in.
With a slight ego?
Yeah, we could say that. It's amazing how nice history has been to him.
I love the way John was describing the padding out of the nativity.
Yeah.
I'm going, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, well, if you look at the progression of the Gospels, do I wish I had a Christian here with me? When you look at the beginning of Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John, right? That's the order that it's usually believed in. David Flusser, notwithstanding, a tremendous scholar who I had the good luck to study under for a brief year. Crazy guy, but very insightful. But Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John, you start with a very short book that doesn't start with the birth story. Right? Mark doesn't start there. You don't get the full nativity thing until you get later on. And by the time you get to John, you get a full theology. You've got a full year of stuff because they're building the religion over time. And it's real clear that the book of John is not written until after the rebellion of 110 is squashed. Right? Theologians want it to be a lot earlier, but it can't be because it names places.
I've never heard of that before.
Well, it names places that don't acquire those names until a later
until
date.
much later.
Right.
Wow.
So if you're going to name a place, then it kind of has to have that name, right? Right. So if I picked up a text that purported to be from the Civil War and it talked about having an outpost in Port St. Lucie, you would know it was not written in the Civil War time. It cannot have been written until Port St. Lucie exists. Thank you, 1985, right? Because before that, it's something Bush Hollow or something? Or I'm not even sure what the little community, and it wasn't even exactly here, but it was kind of sort of, et cetera. All right, yeah. Right. If you go back to the earlier part of the time, Fort Pierce is the older city. Right. It was there first. Port St. Lucie gets built. Here's a piece of Port St. Lucie history. I really do want to write a book on Port St. Lucie history or St. Lucie County history. Maybe I'll work with some historians and get that done. But right, Port St. Lucie starts over an argument over access to the access road to the turnpike coming through. Yeah. It's fascinating, a little bit of early history in the area. And so that's why you see that area down around Veterans Highway and in that area. That was originally planned as part of that setup. But they had to wait, actually, for a number of things to happen before they could even do it. Very interesting early history in Port St. Lucie. Growing rapidly, I think the 8th largest city in Florida right now. And as I was driving out of my allotment, they were infilling even some more lots. So, yeah, Port St. Lucie continuing to grow.
Oh, yeah.
All right,
and it
so
will double again.
Okay, before we hit the end of this very busy hour, thank you for a great Ask a Rabbi. And as Greg mentioned, looking for sponsors. If you'd like to dedicate a session or sponsor it, please contact either the radio station or me. You can contact me through the congregation. Okay, so the question I have is, why do some Jews practice kosher eating? And what makes food kosher? And what's the difference between kosher and not kosher? Oh, this could be a semester. Okay, so let's start out at the end. What is kosher? Kasher simply means fitting to ritual. Okay, befitting ritual. So a Torah is kasher or not kasher. It is either...
Wait a minute.
It's not about eating. It's about ritually fit. Okay? So a menorah, right, a Hanukkah menorah can be appropriate. And the rules change, folks. The rules change over time.
We're moving goalposts
It is a moving goalpost. It is a moving goalpost, and in some groups it gets more and more strict. And I bring up the Hanukkah menorah because when I was little, anything that had 8 lights and something higher, a 9th light, was a kosher Torah. And then over time it becomes they have to be in a row. And now it's they have to be in a row and they have to be the same height. And, the rules have become more stringent.
I have never heard of that.
Yeah.
A kosher Torah.
A kosher Torah, yeah. Torahs are kosher or not. They're not kosher once the words are damaged or if an error is found in the scroll. That's pasul. Okay, there's a term for it. And so what makes food kosher? Hey, we got more questions coming. Okay. Be with you in a moment, Jim. I see that coming through. I saw that across the studio. We'll get to that in a moment here. So let me just real quickly, what makes food kasher? The kosher, that if it's one of the animals that's allowed, for mammals, they have to have split hooves and chew their cud, i.e. vegetarians, not pigs, not rabbits, because of the hooves and chewing cud thing. And those are all, it so happens that kosher animals are healthier, but I don't know that the people who made the rules understand that.
Fish are getting shot up with hormones.
Yeah, we won't
That's
even
another
go
story.
there. You know, and the animal has got to be treated humanely and slaughtered without pain and the blood released. Right. So that has to do with that. And then there has to be no blood. Kosher meat is salted to draw out whatever blood there is in it. Veins are pulled out of it and all kinds of stuff like that, because Jews have this really, this don't touch blood attitude. That's huge, very huge. And that's long-standing.
But that goes back to the
It goes back to, right, to don't.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense, actually.
Yeah, right. To don't have any blood. Blood is God's. It's the life force within all creatures. Shellfish shellfish are not kosher. Fish have to have fins and scales. And again, if you look at a desert community, that makes all kinds of sense. Shrimp don't dry. They don't hold so good in the hot. So why do some Jews practice kosher and others not? Well, first of all, it's difficult in, say, Port St. Lucie, which does not have any kosher restaurants. So if you're going to eat out, guess what? It's not going to be kosher.
2J's was.
2J's is kosher style.
Oh.
Okay, kosher style means the foods are mostly European, right? Because the vast influx of people who were, the other thing you see more often for people who are trying to practice being kosher is they'll become vegetarians, because that's a way around the meat issue, because most American meat is not slaughtered anywhere near appropriately or treated properly. That's a whole nother, we'll do a whole show on that. Okay, so Jim has called me from Port St. Lucie, and thank you for calling, Jim.
Yes, Rabbi. This is from Sandy and Jim. I have a question and a comment. The comment first. Absolutely, you are fantastic.
Thank you, Jim.
My question. What would you call a rabbi who is a politician but does not wear a robe?
Very cute, Jim. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Okay, so full disclosure, Jim is in my congregation. I recognize the voice. Thank you. I guess that's an illusion that I don't wear a robe for services. I wear clothes and just a prayer shawl. And I guess I'm a politician. I thank you.
Hey, there you go.
And if I got that totally wrong, you'll let me know, I'm sure. The bottom line really is that what we do needs to be something that is constructive, that moves us forward, not only as Jews, Christians, Muslim, Buddhists, Hindus, but as human beings. And, right, so Ramadan is the time when Muslims are invited or instructed to abstain from food during daylight hours while the sun is up. They eat during the night, so they're not starving for a month. But the idea of going without food or water, or even their own saliva, actually, during the day, is to help them focus on recognizing what it is to have people who don't have those things on a daily basis, people who, are lacking those basic things, to have some compassion. But it's also a chance to refocus their attention and their energies outside themselves, and not just, me. Because food is one of the places where we often give into our own stuff. Right, I want this, I want that, and boy, do American restaurants cater to that, right? It's one of the things that if you go into a Japanese restaurant in Japan, you basically order from the things they have on the menu. You don't customize it. If you don't like what's there, don't order it. It's a very different kind of an attitude, and Americans don't always get that. So yeah, folks, feel free to contact the radio station and leave suggestions for topics that I will address, or contact me. Okay, so somebody here is mentioning a couple of things. Which lobbyists made ritual become corporate? You want to talk about a political show? Okay, thank you so much. All right, so flipping back, if we will, to the earlier topic of Hanukkah, and it's leading into Herod. That has a lot to do with what's going on and why there's this influx. Herod has to bring the Romans in at about 6 before the Common Era, and it is probably collecting that tax that is in the story of Mary and Joseph going to have the tax collected. It's probably that Roman tax that Herod is collecting because of the rebellion that had been before. And there's another big rebellion after Jesus. Jesus is crucified somewhere around the year 30. It's not very clear when, partially because he's one of hundreds of thousands that they're crucifying. The Romans were known for looking at you cross-eyed and you were gone. Anything they didn't like. And by the way, there is a law on the books in Rome that it's called Mageus, and it's a capital crime. And that crime is saying or doing anything that states or implies that anything is equal to or better than Roman culture. Could you imagine Americans trying to deal with a law like that?
No.
Right. But there are still regimes today where it is illegal and even a capital crime to criticize the government.
Yeah. Yep.
God willing, that'll never happen in America. God willing, please. May we always keep our voices. May we always be able to dissent. And on that note, thank you for being here on this beginning of Ramadan. For Muslim, again, Ramadan Mubarak. For those who are celebrating other things, enjoy them. May it be a wonderful and blessed week. This is Rabbi Shafir Lobb of Congregation Eitz Chayim. This has been an interesting episode, I think, of Ask a Rabbi. Please join me next week, same place, same time, same station. Thank you.
You've been listening to Ask a Rabbi right here on WPSL, Port St. Lucie, the talk of the Treasure Coast, webcaster to the world.